Okay, everybody, this is Joseph Farrell, and I guess I should start out by saying that you probably read that I'm calling this News from the Nefarium, and that title deserves a little explanation. It's actually a nickname that some of my former students, way back when, every now and then I'd have a little group of students over to my apartment, and that's what they nicknamed my dwelling place. It was kind of a it was kind of a nickname for all the strange things that we talked about. So anyway, that's for starters. And second thing I need to mention is I've got a lot to talk about, so I might actually divide this video up into two parts so that I can get it all in so I don't have to talk so fast. I hope I can do it in one, but if not, I'll do it in two. All right. I had someone ask me, in fact, I've got two things I want to talk about. Someone asked me a question and asked me to do a short video, so I'm going to do that. Then there's a comment on my website that I want to read. I'll have to put on my glasses for that because I can't see without them. But I want to comment on the comment because I thought it was pretty interesting and I thought everybody should hear it. And then I had someone begging me, pleading really, to let out just a little bit about what's in Genes, Giants, Monsters, and Men. So I'm going to do that. Anyway, here we go. The comment on the website, if I can get my glasses on here, and it's a comment that was on the article I posted, Japan poised to fill void left by space shuttle's early retirement. And this comment is by somebody calling himself Spirit Splice, all right? And he says, quote, "This approach to space exploration, meaning America's non-space program, to space exploration really puzzles me. I can see no good reason for the elite in this country to pursue this insane strategy. The only rationalization I can come to is that perhaps the Nazi International became powerful enough by the time of Apollo 17 that a deal was made for America never again to leave orbit with a manned program. I mean, why else would they be pursuing this madness? They scrapped Apollo 18 even though it was already scheduled and paid for. Mr. Hoagland's thesis that we stopped because we got what we needed isn't satisfactory in explaining our behavior since the influx of other countries into the space era. I don't think it can be argued that our technology is so superior that we don't need to bother exploring any longer or educating the next generation. So what gives? I don't see the Rockefeller types being that stupid to be making such mistakes. So the only possibility I see left is that a deal was made, or if you like, an order was given." All right. Well, I have to comment on that because I thought it was a pretty interesting comment and pretty perceptive. I personally don't see the United States as continuing this space position of not having any manned space presence, not going back to the moon, not going on to Mars. NASA, of course, is going to continue pursuing the policy, I think, of sending out unmanned probes, and I think that's good. But with China going to the moon, announcing that they're planning to go, and with the Europeans, the Russians, the Indians, everybody else basically going to the moon, I think it's an inevitability. If this gentleman is correct, that somebody basically has ordered the United States not to go back or to remain in low Earth orbit with its manned space program, then if that is true, I think the way to test that idea is to see if, in fact, China is going to go ahead and mount a moon expedition. If, in fact, for some inexplicable reason they decide not to go, then yeah, I think we might be looking at the possibility that someone is holding a gun to everybody's head not to go there. But I don't think that's the case. I think that there's something else in play. Now, regarding what Mr. Hoagland's position is, I certainly can't speak for him. But in discussions that he and I have had from time to time, he realizes that his explanation for the reason that we terminated the Apollo program back then isn't applicable to now. In fact, I think you'd find he is as perplexed as everybody else is as to why NASA doesn't keep up its manned space program and go after it in a major way. In fact, I think probably, if his thinking is like mine, his thinking would be that this would be a perfect bipartisan way to promote jobs that were actually jobs making something, doing something by revitalizing the space program, and it would pay technological dividends to the United States. But if this gentleman's correct that there is either a gun being held to the Anglo-American corporate elite's head, then I don't imagine that gun is being held by China or Russia or India or Europe, anybody that has a space program. It has to be coming from somewhere else. So in my imagination and in my opinion, I think we have to look to the behavior of the other space powers and what they do on the moon or don't do on the moon to see if that hypothesis is true. Certainly it's as good as any other hypothesis, so I'm open to entertain it. All right, that is subject number one, and I've got to check my list here and make sure I cover everything. All right, the next topic that I was asked by somebody to comment briefly on. I hope I can squeeze this into this part of the video. If not, I will just go ahead and cut it into two parts and continue in the second part. Someone asked me to talk a little bit about the history of the occult secret societies that were involved in the formation of the Nazi Party. And that topic, right off the top, is so fraught with difficulty if you want to take the scholarly approach to it. There is an excellent book out by Nicholas Goodrick Clark that is a study of this issue and just how far and how deeply that influence ran. I think that personally he could have taken that book a lot farther, but it's a good introduction. But when we look at the two most important societies that are often viewed as midwifing the Nazi Party into existence, there are two that are usually alleged to be in the background. The first and most important one is a society that's called the Thule Gesellschaft, and that's spelled Thule. It's usually mispronounced Thule by people in this country, but it's pronounced Thule in German. Thule Gesellschaft. This society definitely was involved in, and deeply so, and deeply connected to the leadership of the early Nazi Party. It was founded by a fellow by the name of Baron Rudolf von Ziethenbotendorf, and then there was another fellow involved, heavily involved with it, by the name of Dietrich Eckart. Both of these men were very influential in this society. You had people like Rudolf Hess, Hitler's number two man, his deputy for a number of years until he flew to England, of course, in May of 1941. So in other words, you found a lot of the early Nazi Party leaders in this society. It was a very right-wing society politically, and they bought a newspaper in Munich called I believe it was called the Völkischer Beobachter, the People's Observer. And that newspaper of the Thule Society subsequently was simply transferred to the Nazi Party and was the official newspaper of the Nazi Party. So in other words, even in the propaganda organs, you had a Thule Society influence on the Nazi Party. So the Thule Society definitely is a society that helps midwife the Nazi Party into existence. But there's one thing I want to point out, and I mentioned this, I think it was in the SS Brotherhood of the Bell. The assertion is often made that Adolf Hitler was either an initiate into some occult society or that he was an actual member of the Thule Gesellschaft. There's no evidence that Hitler himself was ever a direct member of the Thule Society. He certainly knew, in my opinion, that most of his senior leadership in the Nazi Party were members of that society. But there's never been, to my satisfaction, enough documentary evidence that he himself was an initiate into that society. Although Dietrich Eckart, before he died, made the claim or the statement, "Follow Hitler." He, it is we who made the music to his dance, or something to that effect. So, in other words, Eckhart claimed that there was this direct influence of the Thule Gesellschaft on Adolf Hitler. Now, one of the things I pointed out, which is actually a couple of things I want to mention before our time here on this video runs out, which it's fast approaching. I mentioned these two things in the SS Brotherhood of the Bell. In my research, I ran across a book that was called Secret Germany, I believe it was. It had the term Secret Germany in the title. And the claim was made that Hitler was initiated into one of these secret societies in 1939, which is much later than most people state. And the author of this book makes the claim that this was announced in a German newspaper at that time, and he doesn't substantiate that announcement. He simply states this. He doesn't give any references for it. But I thought it was interesting enough to include in the book for this reason, and that is that he claimed that Hitler was initiated into an old Prussian occult society that's called the Society of Lizards. And I found that very interesting because the Society of Lizards is one of the spin-offs of the old Teutonic Knights, for which the Hohenzollern monarchs of Prussia, and then later, of course, the Kaisers of Germany, were the Grand Masters. And if you look back in history at the history of the Teutonic Knights, they are definitely a military occult order that date way, way back to the period of the German Emperor Frederick II in the Holy Roman Empire. So, in other words, if Hitler was initiated into that occult society, then he is being run or managed or hobnobbing, if you will, with a very, very old part or component of German secret societies and fraternal movements. Much older, in fact, than the Thule Gesellschaft. It would be the German equivalent at that time of someone having been vetted by the Bilderberg Group or Big Sur, the Bohemian Grove people out in Big Sur, California. So, in other words, if the claim is true, then Hitler's moving in all the right circles in terms of secret societies to put him into power, and he's got those kinds of connections then made available to him. That means that he's basically been kind of anointed as the new Kaiser. Now, that would explain the final point I want to mention. Check my time here. Yep, I'm running out. That would explain, if he had that initiation and that kind of de facto anointing as the new German Kaiser, that would explain very well what is true about Hitler's own occult obsession. It's well known that Hitler and the Nazis gathered up all sorts of occult talismans around Europe. There's, of course, this famous story of the Spear of Destiny, which I have some questions about if that story is actually true. But it is true that the Nazis took the Habsburg monarchy treasures from Vienna to Nuremberg, and the excuse that they gave was they found an old decree of a Habsburg emperor that stated that the Habsburg crown jewels should be kept in Nuremberg. So one of the things you see the Nazis doing is as they conquer various countries, if the crown jewels of those countries are still there, they take them. In other words, they're possessing all the occult symbols of power. And in my mind, there's actually a possibility that had Germany won the war, Hitler might have had himself crowned Kaiser, because of that connection that alleged connection, I should say, with that Society of Lizards, and through them the Teutonic Knights. And then, of course, this whole obsession with collecting all these talismans of power of the monarchies of Europe that they managed to conquer. So anyway, I better